Well, we're back. Coalition Purple. I cannot believe it's been a week already.
Yeah, I know. Time really flies.
It was this week just for, I don't know what it was this week. It was, I mean, it always goes by fast, but man, oh man, it's like, I don't even remember when I sent you the link. It was what, 9:30, 10 o'clock this morning. And it's like, because I totally forgot. It was just like, holy crap, it's Thursday already, which is when we usually record. So,
Yeah.
anyways, but I digress. So much fun stuff going on in the world. So what's
Yeah.
what's piquing your interest this week?
Well, for me, the thing that caught my eye more than anything else was the Postal Workers Union endorsement of Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
I
I
know where
brought
this is going.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've brought this up before that we shouldn't have government unions because what's the government union unionizing against? The well-being of the rest of the country. It's the government. It's not supposed to be partisan. It's not supposed to be unionized. It's supposed to be the government. So in the speech that the head of the union gave at the time that they decided to give their endorsement, one of the things that he said, and I think this is a quote, was that they would do everything in their power to see that Kamala Harris was elected. And of course, from here, I get like super conspiratorial and have no evidence. And, I really admit all these things. But if you really think about that statement coming from that person, because it's a government institution, the postal workers have in their power to not deliver ballots to people, to not deliver ballots to be counted, to look at ballots before they're delivered, to sort mail in ways where if a certain property owner gets flyers from, say, the Republican Party, they don't get their ballot delivered.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to do these things because, I mean, obviously I don't have any evidence that they will. But when somebody in a government agency says they're going to do everything in their power to achieve a goal, well, those are things that are within their power.
Right.
And it all feeds into this whole thing about how much of voting is all through the mail and how much power that gives to essentially the mail carriers. When you and I were younger and first starting to vote, I mean, we had election day. You went
Right.
in, you voted on that day, and that's how you voted. And you had access to mail-in ballots if you set off for one and had a reason for having one.
Right.
You get an absentee ballot, but it took effort to get it. You had to have theoretically, you had to have a reason to get one. But if we're going to say that most voting takes place through the mail,
Mm-hmm.
and the mail carriers are partisan, that's just an obvious problem.
Sends the wrong message.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. And every time I hear one of these things, when whether it's the teachers union or the SEIU or now the mail carrier unions, these are government agencies that have control over wide swaths of people's lives. Like if the teacher unions come out and were to say, we're going to do everything within our power to make sure that Kamala Harris wins. Well, what's in the power of the teachers unions? To teach everyone's children that they should go home and tell mommy and daddy to vote for Kamala Harris? Is that
Right.
appropriate? Do we want that?
Right.
And when these unions are, theoretically fighting for themselves, but are within the government, then, they're not acting as neutral government agencies anymore. They're acting as a union.
Yeah.
And, that it just drives me nuts every time I hear about it.
Yeah. When you first brought this up, I don't know, several months ago, I've never really thought about it, to be honest with you, until you brought it up. And it's a dilemma in some respects because these are kind of frontline. So many of them are frontline workers, and I'm sure they have their shares of workplace horrors and traumas and all that kind of stuff. And so on one hand, I can see, well, why should they be treated any differently than any other working group that would like to organize? But like I said, I'd never really thought about it until you brought it up. About it is a little bit different. It'd be kind of like whatever the FBI or the military. you know, coming out and endorsing one candidate over the other, you know,
Yeah, I
in
mean,
that respect, because they're government employees, and they purposely don't do that because there's politics and everything. Don't get me wrong, but
right.
they don't at least blatantly come out and endorse any particular candidate. And so I don't know what the answer is. Maybe you've thought about that, but what do you do for those groups of government workers that maybe do have some kind of legitimate beef?
Well, I think that the ultimate solution to that is voting. I mean, the idea is that, like, I mean, the ultimate government union in a way would be is the police unions, and there are police unions, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But right now, you have politicians that say that we should defund the police, and you have politicians that say that we need more funding for police. Some politicians say there should be more equipment for police. Some politicians say there should be less funding for police. And the way that those issues get decided, because it's a government agency, should be by voters. Not, okay, you've signed up to be a police officer, and now you unionize, and then you go on strike, and now there's no police force.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't work. And
Right.
over the years, there have been things like, I think back to to Reagan and the air traffic controllers strike.
Right. Mm-hmm.
These the people that are considered critical importance.
Right.
So I mean, there are already sort of different rules for government and government unions, and I think part of working for the government is the government should go out will want to attract good qualified people, and so will be motivated to provide competitive salaries and things like that. But ultimately, you can't organize against the rest of the population and say, well, we have special powers and special powers like tax collecting, like an IRS union. Well, you have the power to collect everyone's taxes. I mean, you've been given this enormous authority and trust by the population
Right.
in general. And now you say, well, now we're just going to form a union. And we're going to use our tax authority to enrich ourselves somehow. It's like
Right.
that doesn't work.
Oh yeah,
It's the
no, it does. It does. No question about it. It does send a very mixed message, and it does feed into this whole issue that I think, as a country as a whole, we're dealing with is just trust. Period. Whether you feel that that's happening more on one side or the other, it doesn't really matter. It just feeds into this mistrust, and how do you go about trying to solve that? And I don't know if because obviously I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on the internet. Um, but I don't know what the constitutionality of public unions. Obviously, it must be constitutional, right? Because
yeah.
they exist.
Well,
So, would you have to somehow outlaw it in such a way that it would be constitutionally valid?
I'm gonna have to look that up again because years ago I did look into it, and I know that there have been in the past um, prohibitions about federal unions.
Hmm.
Um, but off the top, but my memory is so foggy on it that
Yeah.
uh, I'm not recalling the details well enough to really make a statement on it. But I know that there have been times where federal unions have been banned,
Oh,
and
yeah, for
uh,
sure.
federal unions didn't come into and government unions didn't come into existence for a long time.
Right.
Um, much later than the private sector unions came along.
Oh, yeah.
So there's always been a difference between the two things that's been recognized by
Oh,
you
yeah.
know many things over the years. But right now, everyone just sort of like, oh yeah, unions. Of course, everyone unionizes. Everyone's part of a union. And I'll just, for the record, say one more time that I'm very much in favor of private sector unions. I absolutely think they're protected by the First Amendment, and they should absolutely exist. But when you go and you decide, okay, we're going to be part of the government, we're going to have these special powers. It's like you think about the police. The police have special powers. They can do things that the rest of us can't do.
Yep.
They are given powers and given privileges that normal, average, everyday Joe Schmo, you and me don't have.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to say on top of that, they're going to be a union, and then they're going to be able to use those special government powers to enrich themselves through a union. I mean, it's just like it's a disaster.
Yeah. Well, again, ultimately, it comes back down, like we've talked a million times before, down to the political incentives involved, right? So,
Yeah,
and it's like, to your point, you would hope that we incent our politicians to put in structures and policies that attract people to government work, because you want the best of the best. Really, in my mind, you want the best of
yeah,
the best. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to spend more money. It just means you need to give them the ability to do their job to the fullest extent possible, and compensate them accordingly. But that's not, and that is the part. Until you, like I said, until you brought it up, I never really thought about it. It's sort of there's a lot of vested interest in a public union, and particularly on the federal side, where you can kind of print money.
right.
Um, that there's it's sort of a bit of a blank. It could be a blank check. I'm not saying it's. I think there's some safeguards in there, and people are, it's not gone totally off the rails, but the appearance of it is not. I mean, it's kind of like the whole. I think we have to worry about appearances, unfortunately, more than ever. It's like the judges accepting really nice, lavish gifts in the Supreme
Yeah,
Court, right? I mean, even if it didn't influence them in any particular case or whatever, it just doesn't look right.
yeah,
It's
no,
just not, it's just not cool. And so, and, you kind of layer that onto the whole public union thing. It just doesn't, there's got to be a different way of doing this to
yeah,
make sure the right checks and balances are in place. Feel like you're still being represented, so you're not, whatever, being overworked or in unsafe conditions or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, not have literally direct linkages into how you go about getting paid, because you
yeah.
really do.
Yeah, and
Part of
but
the
the other
government.
thing is that I think it's important to recognize, like, if you're in a private sector union, you really have no ability to uh, remove the structure above you.
Right,
You
right,
can't vote out your boss.
right,
On the other hand, if you work for a public sector union, you can vote out your boss. If you're working for a government agency and you're under the direct control of, say, the governor, well, you can organize with people just like every other person does to get the person thrown out of office based on the fact that he's mistreating the people who
right,
are his employees.
right,
So that's a huge difference. There is a mechanism in place within government to remove people who are running things and doing a bad job. So if you think that your work conditions are poor, then you can vote out the person who's creating the poor work conditions and get somebody else elected. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But when you say that, we're going to be able to take money out of the system and we're going to act in our interest as a unionized group within the government, it's just too much of a problem.
right.
It's like a whole nother tier of government that exists on its own because you know the people who work in the government, in a sense, control what the government does and does not do.
Right. Right. Yeah. No. No. Absolutely. No. It's a really great discussion, and it sort of bridges to one thing that I wanted to talk about too. Ironically enough, about unions, is that the fact that you might get it right. It's the Teamsters. I was going to say
Oh yeah,
UAW. The Teamsters are basically not endorsing anybody, and kind of bringing this back around to the whole third party thing. Now, the reasons why they're not endorsing anybody, I think, is a little suspect, in the respect that the management of UAW really, I think, tends to, well, they for years have always supported Democrats.
yeah,
But when they went out and polled their actual members by like 60 to 40 margin, the members were actually saying, no, we support Trump.
right,
And so that's why they ended up at this stalemate, right? And but what I took away from that is all the more reason that you need a third or fourth or fifth party to choose from, because
Yeah.
odds are, I guarantee you, if they dig deep into that poll, there's going to be a bunch of people that support Trump and a bunch of people that support Kamala that don't really want to support either one of them if they had another choice.
Right.
And so it was just interesting on, kind of the heels of the this whole issue, is that here we go. Teamsters have basically kind of threw up their hands.
Yeah. Well, this
That's
is
just
one
the
of those
reality we're
elections.
at.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of hand throwing, I think, in this election. It's just, it's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
So who
Yeah.
knows?
So anyway, so we'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The other thing that caught my eye, I was reading about, I don't know if you saw this, the share, and this kind of goes back to a discussion we had a week or two ago about the schools and trying to get more mental health support and learning disability support and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if you saw this one story about the sheriff in Volusia County. The only reason why I know Volusia County is because I lived there for a short while. But the sheriff is now made it a policy that he's going to start publishing the names and photos of children who are threatening school violence. And I'm going, because he's so frustrated that these kids are just getting away with, calling them bomb threats and going on social media and showing off all the guns they have and all that, which all are very legitimate concerns. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But to take it to the next step, and the first one that he publicized was 11 years old, and
Wow.
it's like,
Yeah, I don't
really?
know
Now,
about that.
is this the way we're going to solve this problem? Now, maybe you're going to scare off a few people, but crazy just begets crazy. I mean,
That just feels, I don't know. It just kind of feels like defamation.
it
You know,
is.
it's
It
like
is.
you're going to put this person's name out here. One of the things, it brings up to my mind, and this is, I guess I'm just going on a complete tangent, but doxing. Have you've
Mm.
heard of like doxing people where you publish their names and their address and whatever?
Yep.
I think that should be considered a threat.
Yeah.
Like if you dox somebody, I think that should be a criminal offense that can actually be followed up either civilly or criminally,
Yeah.
because that is like, I mean, the reason you do that is you put it out there and you're hoping that some crazy person finds it and goes and gets the person that you're doxing.
Right.
So I think that there is like inherent violence involved in doxing somebody, which I think could be criminal. So, but I mean, maybe you could say the same thing for, I mean, phone if you phone in a false bomb threat, that is a crime. So,
Oh no, absolutely. No, I'm not at all. I actually understand his frustration on one hand, because there is so much more of it going on, and they're really, kids can do some of these. Not only kids, adults can do some of these things. This kid was not the smartest, clearly, because he was doing it on social media,
yeah, there
and they
you
were
go.
able to find it, right? But I shouldn't say he wasn't smart enough. He just was, just not even. Dude, come on. It's
Yeah,
like the people are going to be able to track you down pretty easily if you're showing off your weapons on your bed. Um, but you can do a lot of these things anonymously, and so those are the scary parts. That's kind of like the stuff going on in Springfield, Ohio, or whatever, with the whole cat dog thing,
oh,
and and it's like, these, again, doesn't have anything to do with your opinion of what's going on with the immigration system, which I think most people will agree is just a total disaster.
yeah,
But in this particular case, it's like, this is absurd that this whole town has basically been turned upside down because people are anonymously calling
yeah,
in bomb threats to hospitals and schools and government
yeah.
buildings. It's like, this is where the whole thing's got to get really toned down, so.
I think I should go on the record saying, just for the hell of it, that if I were living somewhere and I was homeless and I was starving and I went to a park and there were ducks I would probably eat one.
Right.
Just putting it out there.
Right.
But I mean, as crazy as people are going, if you were starving and you
Oh
you
yeah.
were homeless and
Yeah.
you were out on your own, you might eat a duck. I've eaten goose. I've eaten duck. I've had Peking duck. It's like it's pretty good. So if I was starving, I think
Yeah.
I would probably eat a duck.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think in the case of the Haitian immigrants, they are for the most part here legally because
Yeah.
they were allowed in due to the craziness going on in Haiti.
Mhm.
Um, and so, they're here legal, and so I assume they're getting some support services, so they hopefully don't have to resort to go finding a goose or a duck. But I'm with you, and that's the part that always drives me crazy about the immigration stuff. Is you know, we need to fix it, no question about it. But and I know there's some bad people that get away with stuff and shouldn't be in the here and all that. But my guess is it's a fairly low percentage. And most of these people, if I was in their position and didn't have any real future,
Yeah.
I'd probably try some pretty crazy stuff too. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't see how people can dispute that they shouldn't be doing it. I mean, yes, they shouldn't be doing it, but push come to shove,
Yeah.
you might
Right.
want to
You
go
eat
eat
a
a duck.
duck. But the other thing that I would say too about the whole immigration situation is that the Haitians are legitimately asylum and
Oh,
refugee
yeah.
seekers because Haiti is an absolute
Oh,
mess.
it's a disaster.
We would be better able to help house, feed, care for, provide medical coverage for all this stuff for the Haitians who are coming here legitimately if we weren't simultaneously allowing
Right.
millions of people to come in here for no particular reason at all. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the discussion about immigration, legal immigration, and illegal immigration. Is that if you, it's kind of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If you do enough to weaken the United States economically enough, then you take away the greatest engine of aid that exists anywhere in the world.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, if our country goes bankrupt tomorrow, then all the hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars in aid that we send worldwide dries up. And all the assistance and asylum and medical care that we provide to people here, whether they're legal or illegal, dries up. And it just reinforces the idea that we should have a responsible immigration policy because you don't want to kill the golden goose.
Yeah.
I agree that we should allow people into this country from other countries. We should have immigration. And I even think that taking in refugees from Haiti is probably something we should be doing because they need
Absolutely.
some place to go and they're in horrible circumstances.
Yep.
But what we've allowed to happen at our southern border is just inexcusable.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we're, and I know they all claim they're always trying to figure out the root cause of the issue, right?
Yeah.
Which is, it is so complicated. It's like, okay, so if they're coming from whatever, Venezuela, how are you going to stop those people? I don't know. Because I understand that they don't want to be there. And I think there have been some pretty awful things that happen in that country as well as
Mhm.
others. Um, but it's like, okay, how are they not being stopped at Mexico's border? Right.
Right.
And that's where it really is. It's kind of like the homeless problem. There's no such thing as a local homeless problem. It's all regional.
Yeah.
And this is just a big region, between us and particularly Mexico. And together that needs, because they're really the first stop.
Yeah.
And why we can't figure out some better means for everybody, because it's actually fueling a lot of the problems in Mexico too. I mean,
Yep.
this is what's driven the cartels to get into that business
Yep.
because they see money, and we're just we're just creating more opportunities for drugs and cartels and all that. by not figuring it out with Mexico
Yeah.
how this has to happen,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so
I don't usually like to tout either candidate or party, but I have to give a little bit of credit here to Trump. The Remain in Mexico policy that he had in place, I actually pretty much solidly agreed with. The idea was that if you had to seek asylum in the first safe country that you found yourself
right,
in. And so if you come into Mexico, you have to seek asylum in Mexico. And the idea was that you can't just walk all the way through Mexico and come to the United States and say you're an asylum seeker. Well, why didn't you stop in Mexico? Once you reached
right,
Mexico, you were safe. You could have sought asylum there. And that sort of weeded out the difference between people legitimately seeking asylum and people who were just economic migrants.
yeah,
And I think that was a really good policy because it sent the message that, look, you can't just walk all the way through Mexico and then show up at our border and then you're going to come to the United States. No, you're going to get stopped, and we're going to figure out who you are and what you're doing. And then because people, I think, generally knew that they weren't going to be able to just walk into the United States, and they didn't particularly want to just walk through Mexico for no particular reason,
right,
a lot of the illegal migration stopped. And during the last few years of the Trump administration, illegal border crossings were way down. And then, the Biden Harris administration came in and got rid of that. And well, again, I'm not gonna endorse Trump by any sense of the imagination, but that policy, that what Biden Harris did to get rid of that and then to just completely abrogate all authority over the border is just appalling.
well, and then basically they've ended up kind of going back to his policy
Yeah, right before the election.
right
Surprise,
before the
surprise.
election because they had to do something. And again, that's why I say, yeah, it's reachable. And again, if we work down it from a regional level, I mean, it's also a challenge for Mexico. I understand
Oh yeah,
Mexico's position. So it's not, they shouldn't have to burden, take care of the entire burden themselves. I'm not suggesting that in any stretch. But being that, and really that's the way international law, I think, works, right? You're supposed to
right.
seek refuge in the first place you can land.
Yeah,
And but we should support that and we should help with that situation.
yeah,
Um, and again, we've just way overcomplicated things, and it's become so politicized that, and because back, again, when me and I were younger, back when George Washington was still around, um, I mean, my grandparents were, farmers and all that. And back then, there was actually a very sensible migrant worker program.
yeah,
They would just come back and forth from Mexico, work
yep,
the season, because most really didn't want to live here. They wanted to be with their families and
right.
live where they grew up and all that. And now, don't get me wrong, I don't think it was necessarily the best working conditions and things like that in terms of how they were treated.
Yeah,
That's to the side. I mean, I'm not saying we should go back to that necessarily, but the whole idea of having migrant workers is nothing new, and
yeah,
it can be done in a reasonable way. And people do want to follow the rules, generally speaking, if you make it easy enough. And they do want to go home.
yeah,
A lot of people really don't. They're living here out of desperation more than anything. They'd rather be with their families,
yeah,
particularly within a lot of that culture where family is so important, and matriarchs and patriarchs and all that are they're live and breathe that, right? And so I think there's a huge opportunity to find some reasonable ground there, working with Mexico to do it.
yeah. When, as I say, I think our open border policy, like you've been saying, really does hurt Mexico a lot because,
It
again,
does.
it invites people to transit through Mexico, and all it does is enriches the cartels. And I mean, for my entire lifetime, I've heard about how corrupt the Mexican government is and how
Yeah.
cartels, have so much influence over everything and all this stuff. And when we do irresponsible things in this country that facilitate even more money flowing into the Mexican cartels. Well, that's
Yeah.
just an enormous burden that it places on Mexico, and
Yeah.
it's terrible for everybody.
Yeah. No, we continue to make the problem worse just because of that. And frankly, Mexico hasn't helped itself in a lot of
Oh
ways
yeah,
either.
oh yeah.
So that's why we have to somehow, some way, look at it from a regional perspective,
Mhm.
and help each other out. But it's terrible for Mexico as well as us. There's no there. It's a totally lose situation for everybody.
Yeah, and
So
I think also, because you were talking about the seasonal worker idea, because that's a California thing that's been around,
oh
for
yeah,
at least it used to be.
yeah,
And the thing is, if you had a well-regulated transit visa program so that people could come back and forth for seasonal work, that would also allow you to have a well-organized labor protection series of laws where
exactly.
the seasonal workers would be guaranteed certain protections so that they wouldn't be mistreated.
Yeah.
The real problem that I've always had with a lot of this immigration stuff, and why I think it's so insidious in many respects, is that I think people want black market labor. I think
Oh,
especially
yep,
in a place like California where costs are so through the roof and so
yep,
abysmally high that no one can afford them. One way to cut your labor costs is to have a black market labor system. And these big cities in California, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, to an extent, uses this black market labor to get around things like minimum wage laws.
yep.
The minimum wage comes along, they say, oh, you got to pay everybody $20 an hour. Well, not if they're in the country illegally and they're willing to work
Right.
for the poor.
Yeah.
And you just
Right.
don't, you just pay them under the table, and they have no recourse because they're in the
Yeah.
country illegally. And so I think a lot of the policy that we see with the border is to allow cities with um, problematic economic systems stay afloat, is to have this black market labor. And then what that does is it means that most unskilled jobs, which could be good jobs, I mean, manual labor is a way of making a living, and if you're doing that, you can maybe move up and get some education and do some other things and be promoted within a company and whatever. It's a place to start. But those sort of starting manual jobs that used to exist, have all been eaten up by the black market labor,
Oh
and
yeah.
that it just freezes out a huge percentage of the population that might want to work or might want to work part-time or do some things, but it's just not
Yeah.
available anymore because it's all going into the black market, which is
Yeah.
terrible.
No, it is. It is just truly awful what some of these people are forced to do, and
Yeah,
they have no going back to the union thing. They have no representation in any way, shape, or form. They can't because
right.
they're not even supposed to be here, right?
Yep.
So it is. And insidious was the perfect word for that because that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. It's just an awful environment. And again, the only people that win are the ones that are trying to break the rules because they're trying to save some money.
Yeah.
And just kind of, we're going after kind of the wrong people a lot of times on that stuff. So,
Yeah.
anyways, well, we better wrap it up. Good discussion. And
Yep.
it'll be Thursday again before you know it.
Yeah. We'll feel better to say hi
Right?
to your wife for me, and hopefully she feels well, and best
Oh,
wishes.
yeah. Fall time is upon us. So I think it's a change of season things.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Here
sure.
we go.